Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Scott Giacoppo. I am the director of the National Municipal, hold on, we just changed our name, the National Municipal and Shelter Support Team. We were formerly called the Shelter Outreach Team, and we just changed our name actually today, October 1st, to the Municipal and Shelter Support Team. So welcome. I'm really excited about being here tonight. We have some great people, and we're gonna have a great conversation. And that's pretty much what it is. It's a conversation that, we have often. And you guys get to take a sneak peek into what we do on a weekly basis. We talk to each other, we share stories, we share, how to improve things across the country. And, best friends, we're talking to April and AUDRA and, all these guys that you're going to hear from. And we're taking what they're doing well and bringing it around the country. And it's really exciting. And that's how this all happens, is through conversations like this. But before we start, as expected, we do have some housekeeping to do. So everyone is automatically muted for the presentation, so you don't have to worry about accidentally unmuting yourself. No problems there. If you do have a question at any point, please just type it into the Q&A box. Those will be visible only on our end. And we may stop throughout the presentation to answer some of those if they're relevant to that particular question or topic. Otherwise, we have left time at the end to answer some questions. We're going to go through and answer some questions, but also keep an eye on the chat box for links to resources. We're going to be putting a lot of links into that chat box, and they'll be on our town hall webpage sometime tomorrow, including the link to this. This is being recorded, so you do need to know that, if you want to watch it again or share it with someone else, it'll be up probably sometime tomorrow on our town hall webpage. And we also want you to know that the Best Friends Rachel Ray Save Them All grant cycle is now open to all of our network partners. Applications will be accepted through October 23rd. And if you're not a network partner yet, don't worry, you have until October 9th to become one. And that way you'll still make the October 23rd application grant deadline. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my friends. And I'm really excited about this group of people tonight. So we have AUDRA Michael. She's the Director of Pinal County Animal Care and Control in Pinal County, Arizona. We have Nick Walton, and he works here at Best Friends. He's the manager of the newly formed Municipal and Shelter Support Team. And April Moore, the Chief Officer of Animal Services for the Kansas City Pet Project. And I am excited to be able to say that because, April, this is the first time that that's being said pretty much publicly, right? It's a new role for you. You got to unmute yourself.
I got it. It was stuck. It wasn't me this time. It's technology. Yeah, it's first day. So you might be the very first to so publicly announce.
Well, congratulations, April. And I know Kansas City has got one hell of a chief on their hands. I'm really looking forward. I know that's a new program. They just got the contract for the animal services, and Nick and I have been working with them, and we're really glad to have you aboard. I'm really looking forward to it. So, and I know it's going to be great. All right, so let's jump into some of these questions. And I'm going to start with you, AUDRA. AUDRA, I know you started off as an officer and then worked your way up through the ranks to become the director of the department. When you first started, what was the philosophy regarding impounding animals that you believed were in violation of the cruelty laws? And how has that changed since then?
Well, welcome. Thank you for having me. Everybody, my name is AUDRA, and I started as an officer in 2011. So it wasn't that long ago that I was an officer. And when I first started, it was very, very cut and dry. You go out, you pick up dogs if you feel that they're not being taken care of, if they're running at large, if you see some sort of neglect or anything, you cite for every single person you come across, you cite for no license. It's like, that's it, cut and dry. We were busting out of the seams all the time. So it was a lot to take, at first. And there's only a core few of us left that were from those old days. And later on, it started moving towards, well, why can't we just help these people? Why can't we do something to keep the animal in the home rather than bring it here to the facility? And as I've been going to these conferences and I've been learning that this is actually a thing that's happening all over the United States, it's not just my idea or anything, that it is actually working, and it is a lot better, and it's helping the entire staff because we have less animals to care for. We are doing something that's good for the community. It's making us not seem like we're dog catchers. We're actually there to help the community and be public servants. You know what I mean? So that's where we're going now, and we've been doing it probably actively for about 1.5 years now.
But when you roll up on an animal that is, you believe is being neglected, and I don't want to say, I think one of the things we really need to do is separate cruelty from neglect. If you roll up on someone and the dog's been getting beaten with a 2x4, which unfortunately some of us have had that happen, it's different than what we really want to work through tonight in talking about, neglect versus lack of resources. So
Right.
you pull up on a house that, there's a skinny dog, we'll say, out in the yard. At what point do you decide, hey, I'm gonna impound this dog and charge this person with cruelty versus, I'm gonna help this person? I mean, at what point do you make that decision? When do you say enough is enough?
Right. So I think it's very important that you decipher what's cruelty and what's neglect. And cruelty, like you said, is active cruelty. You're strangling a puppy. You're doing something horrible to an animal actively. You're doing that because you want to. And in our ordinances, it says intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly, keeping an animal from food, water, shelter, or medicine, vaccines. Passive neglect or cruelty is, not grooming them, no shelter in weather conditions, stuff like that. So when you go out into the field, you have to be aware of where are you at? What is the diversity of the people you're dealing with? What kind of an area is it? Is it a low income area? Is this a culture thing? Do people only know that the dog is outside on a chain? That's all they've had their whole entire life. And as much as it sounds like they're not, what do you mean you don't know that it's not good to tie up your dog in 120-degree weather? Because I'm in Arizona, how can you be that stupid? Well, believe it or not, people don't really think twice about it, and at that point, there should be nothing that we can't do to help that person if they truly want to keep their pet. And they all love their pet. They just don't love their pet the way we love our pet. You can't be judgmental. You cannot just say, I would never do that to my animal. I just can't believe you treat your animal like this. You have to step back, think about what you're doing and where you're at, and then you have to actually help. And it takes a big person to look past all that and actually say, what can we do to help you? I don't want your animal. I don't want your animal. What can we do to help you? Now, you go ahead and you help somebody, this skinny animal, which could be an underlying disease. It could be something, maybe it needs medical treatment. Maybe they need food. Maybe it's as simple as helping them with food. It could be something very simple. And then you don't have to bring the animal in. You don't have to try to get it adopted. You don't have to pay for its medications and alters and all that other kind of stuff. And it's actually in a home that is the only thing it knows. It knows no couch. It knows no difference. It doesn't know. You have to make life better for the animal. Period. That is why you're there. You're going to help these people make that pet's life better. And then you proceed. How can I help you? What can I do to help you? When that ends is when you continue to go back and go back again and go back again and do your follow-up. And this is where a lot of officers drop the ball. They don't follow up. They say, okay, I did this one good thing for them and everything, and then they move on and they never come back. Well, I'll hit you with a headline. Just because you helped them that one time doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to be the best pet owner in the whole world. You have to keep on them so that they go, oh God, I got to go make sure that my dog's got water. I got to go make sure that my dog is not tangled up on a chain. You have to actually follow through because you have to think about that pet and what is the best thing for that animal. And if they can't hold up their end of the bargain, then you might want to start looking at it in a different way. Hey, you know what? I don't know. Do you really want this animal? Is there something, maybe we should just take it, and maybe, but it's a very gray area, and it's definitely hard.
Yeah, and I think also too, when you have the officers that are doing what you're referring to as follow-ups, it also, I think, if it's done properly, it can be more of a relationship builder within the community. So it's not like, I've always seen it, not so much as I'm going to someone's house to make sure they're following up with the law and they're still in compliance. It's more like, hey, Audra, how you doing? Remember I was here last week? I just wanted to, check up on Sam, your dog, and see how everything was going. And oh, hey, by the way, I heard there was this new dog training class, or the new pet supply store down the street opened up, or whatever. Using it as a way to build relationships within the community.
Right.
And, and I know you play some role, with new officer training and so forth. How do you teach your officers those decision-making skills? Because I can imagine as a new officer, it's like, am I making a mistake? Am I, should I take this dog? Or, he seems like a nice guy, but what if he's lying to me? And I know that, I think back on my first days as an officer, how intimidating it can be to make sure that I'm doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you teach your officers how to make those decisions?
I tell my officers that I completely support their decision. However, I would like to be in the conversation and let's discuss it. So they all have a P card so that they can buy food or a doghouse or whatever it is or help with fencing or something like that. They all have the resources to be able to do that. I also ask them, what is the outcome you seek? Do you feel that it's the best outcome to remove this animal from this situation? Or is it better to just educate and show them what is maybe they need to do and give them the resources to do it? And then once you've done all that, if it turns into a really horrible situation and you end up taking the animal anyway, you have something when you do go to court showing the judge, hey, we tried with this person, we tried to get them to, take care of their animal and they chose not to do it. And the animal ended up dying out on the tie out, because it was overheated. We did our part. They didn't do their part, So they have to remember, I always ask them, what is it that you're looking to do? Are you looking to punish this person because they had an attitude with you or you don't like them? Or, what is it that you are looking to do? Well, I just want them to take care of their animal. Well, then help them, help them do it. And, and I have a great staff and they are they're awesome. They're rock stars. They don't even give me any lip whatsoever. They're just and I think about the old days, that would never happen in the old days. No way would that have happened. It would have not been something that they would have been open to at all. Yeah. That's the difference.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Audrey. And I actually want to jump over to April now, and because when you talk, we talked a little bit about the new officers, and you mentioned some of the older officers, back in the day. April, I know that you too started out as an officer and worked your way up through the ranks, and I know that you've also taken the helm, so to speak, of agencies where there were officers who had also been trained in that enforcement-based, we'll call it, enforcement-based methods. What strategies would you recommend to people when you, if I were a new chief and I came in, I said, boy, a lot of my guys have been doing this for years and they're not thinking that way. What strategies would you recommend to me to help me move my officers into that mindset, so to speak?
Yeah. So when we think about effective strategies for bridging those philosophical gaps, what we're really talking about are open communication. We're talking about building trust, and we're talking about setting expectations. We have to be willing to work at building relationships and rapport with our veteran officers. We have to be committed to being an active listener. Don't passively listen. Really be committed to hearing from their perspective what they're sharing with you, right? And we don't always do that really well as humans, but the great news is the more we practice, the better we get. But we also have to remember that every interaction we have is an opportunity to build trust. And, it's through that trust and that developed understanding that we get to the sort of the root or the foundation of those philosophical beliefs. And that's when we start to really kind of understand how wide that gap may be. And once we get to that point, we can start bridging those gaps. Now, you also want to set performance measures. If you're going into a new agency and it's taking a different direction, well, we want to set performance measures around what we're trying to do. So if you want your officers to help people, well, then we need to measure the time they're spending on engagement activities. We need to measure what types of resources they're connecting community members to. And we want to review citations. So, to Audra's point earlier, this is an opportunity to sit down and talk with your officers about what they're experiencing and try to understand from their perspective why they made the decisions they made. What is their litmus test for issuing a citation or trying to secure a warrant versus taking a different direction? Generally speaking, my litmus test is if I can give somebody information or resources and they're going to take that and they're going to do better by their animal and that animal's going to thrive, then that's a family that I'm going to continue to commit to work with. And so lastly, the other bit of this, and I think most agencies are sort of on board with this at this point, but it's important to state, if any agencies are still accepting owner surrenders in lieu of citations, they just need to stop doing that. Among other things, it's so detrimental to building trust. It undermines the whole process.
Yeah, and thank you for that. That is one of my biggest pet peeves is,
Yeah.
well, if you just give up the animal, I won't write you a citation. It doesn't do anything. And, all of us have been out in the field. And if there's one thing we all know is that when we take an animal away from someone, they get another one.
Yep.
We go out and get another one, and that cycle starts, and we just it's a revolving door sometimes. And I think that's really one of the things that I love about, I hate to call it the new way of, people looking at this, but the community-based or the community engagement or whatever term you want to use for it. And I know Nick's going to talk a little bit about that, but that's really where, people, when you look at the effectiveness of this way of doing it overall, it's really, it's really beneficial across the board.
No, absolutely.
That's a good point. Abel, you were an officer in Austin, Texas, when they were more focused on enforcement, and then they made that transition, which is, a model for other agencies to look at, still today. How did that switch happen with you when you were in there? Because you were part of that transition. What kind of obstacles did you hit? How did that make you feel? When all of a sudden you went from writing a citation to giving out dog houses or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, sure. So field services in Austin sort of started making that switch around the time that the city council passed the no-kill resolution, along with our 34-point implementation plan. Now that plan was essentially a roadmap for our shelter to achieve a higher level of life saving. So it did a lot of great things, but what it didn't do was include animal control. And so, we found ourselves trying to figure out how to marry our animal control department with this, this plan to really reposition ourselves within our community. And so what we figured out was that by keeping pets and families together and working to empower our community through those conversations, through building trust, through delivery of resources, we increased our community's capacity to care for the pets. And so in order to do that, though, effectively, we had to leave all of our biases at the door, which is not always easy. And I think Audra touched on that as well. We had to truly commit without judgment to meeting people where they're at and then working to deliver them the resources or information they need to be successful or to work through whatever barrier or challenge they're facing. And by practicing true empathy in those interactions, we were better positioned to solve for the best possible outcome for both the pets and the people.
That's great. I love bringing up empathy because that's something that we all need to practice more of when we're in the field, especially when we're in the field. And our days just get frustrated and we sometimes lose sight of that. So thank you for that. So overall, how did the community and the animals, obviously the animals in particular, how did they really benefit from this new way of doing things that you were doing there?
So, it's kind of, I was thinking about, Austin's transition and sort of, I've spoken about it many times. And so, in thinking about sort of our walk down this path. You know, a while back, one of my Texas colleagues was remarking on our 30,000 annual animal intake just a decade ago. And when you think about it, in 10 years, we reduced our annual intake by nearly half that, right? Which is remarkable. And she asked, you know, where did all these animals go? Well, they didn't go anywhere. They were still in our community, right? They were in their homes. And so one of the biggest benefits to our community is that their families were staying together. And so that allowed our shelter to then focus on the animals in greatest need. And it was because our animal control officers worked with our community to keep pets safe at home. They built trust and they repositioned themselves as a resource. And consequently, for the Austin community, life savings skyrocketed.
Sorry, I couldn't get my unmute done.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's awesome, April. Thank you. Thank you. So when an agency is looking to make that transition, what should they look out for? Like, are there any red flags, or what should they do or in particular watch out for when making that transition?
Sure. The best piece of advice I can give is agencies need to be intentional in their actions. They need to think through what they want to accomplish and what they want their role in the community to look like. And once they've figured that out, they need to build a plan around it. So need to make sure that you've got the resources in place, the training in place, the policies, the procedure, and the advocacy, right? Because you're going to want that support. And then build in accountability. So those are the performance measures we were sort of talking about early on. Maintain open communication. It's so critical. I think we can all agree. And that's communication with your officers and communication with your stakeholders, with your leaders, you know, with everyone who you touch, right? All the important folks in your organization that are going to help you be successful. And then establish measures that actually measure what you're wanting to see.
And April, when you set those, I know I'm not supposed to, but I'm going off here. When you set those performance measures and someone's not meeting them, how do you work with them, like, to get them up there? Like, what is an average, you know, performance? Like, hey, look, you really should have done this or this. So how does that look to you?
Yeah, so to me, at least initially, how it looks is a conversation, right? We're working to build rapport with our team. We're already ideally positioning ourselves to help them build out their decision-making skills through conversations around citation review and just talking generally about what their call experience is. So when we have someone who's underperforming, let's say, you know, it starts with that conversation. It starts with an evaluation of that particular call, or, you know, if it's a series of calls, it's trying to get to that understanding around why we're continuing to make this type of decision when what we want is for this type of decision to be made. And then applying, same as we would a community member, right? Applying those resources, that information, and supporting that officer to help them come along. Now, with that said, not all officers will come along, and that's okay, right? But as leaders, we need to be committed to helping our officers come along, helping our organization come along, helping our community come along.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, in a few minutes, we have some questions we're going to throw at everybody, but let's get to Mr. Walton here. Nick, Nick, you actually came into a department, and you were an ACO for a while outside of Atlanta. You came into a department that was making that transition when you arrived, and you were actually trained by someone who may have had that more enforcement-based philosophies. But from what I know about you, you never really bought into that right out of the gate. You know, tell us a little bit about what made you go the other route and be just like feeling like it's just not right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely fair to say that we were in a transition, like right when I got hired. And so I can't think of a better time, honestly, for me to start. But I remember like it was yesterday, there was a case where there was just a skinny brown dog in the backyard. The dog had shelter. The dog had water. But the optics of the situation with the dog being skinny, you know, that was the main priority for my training officer at the time. Now, also the owner was cooperative, right? The owner was open to showing us the animal and everything of that nature. And there was absolutely no reason for what we ended up doing, which is impounding the animal and issuing citations. Okay, and now this is, you know, Audra and April both touched on it earlier. It used to be black and white, like we enforced the book. And so I watched it happen, and I watched the cycle unfold in front of me with this particular case. The cycle that you just referred to, where, you know, the dog was entered into an overcrowded shelter, right? And, you know, it just gets kind of lost in the mix at that point. And, you know, we're fighting for space, fighting for adoptions and all of this. And, you know, who knows, the sicknesses, the list goes on. But also then the owner goes to court, right? And then the owner gets fined like $300. And then the owner has difficulty paying that $300 and they gets caught up in the legal system, right? And then what happens next is we're riding down by his house and there's another dog in the backyard. Okay. And so he got the dog from somewhere else. And so it was a perfect opportunity for me to go the other way, because I got to see the exact cycle that you're talking about, like, unfold directly in front of me. I also want to point out I was able to ride with another officer who kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there is another way to approach these conversations, right? You don't have to be badge heavy. Instead of saying, hey, I'm Officer Walton with Fulton County or XYZ County Animal Services, you can approach that door and say, hey, how's it going? I'm Nick, you know, and I see that there's a dog in the backyard. It looks like a little skinny, you know, do you need any help with that? Like, I have dog food on my truck. And so, like, I understand that this situation is very specific, but seeing that officer and the way that he interacted with the public opened my eyes to the fact that there is another way to do this. And it all comes down to the animal, right? What is the best thing for this animal? So I was in a perfect storm, to be honest with you, Scott.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know your department came out of that much better for it. And I know they're doing some great work out there now. I actually talk to your old boss all the time.
Yep.
Good man. Well, before you left and joined my team, you became the FTO. So you were actually in charge of training the newer officers. How did you train? And I asked everyone else the same thing. How do you teach those critical skills? Like, you know, at what point do you look at a skinny dog, and I'm using skinny dog, but we can use skinny dog out without shelter. You know, all of these things that technically are violations of the animal cruelty laws. I mean, if you think about it, they are violations. But at what point, like, how do you teach those officers not to just automatically go by the book?
Sure. Yeah, look, those lines are blurry, you know. It's a difficult thing to approach, but at the end of the day, what it comes down to is getting a full picture of what you're looking at. Don't look at one specific thing, right? Just because a doghouse is broken doesn't mean you need to only focus on the doghouse. Look at the behavior of the animal, the overall health of the animal. Does the animal have water, food, shelter, right? The environment in which it's kept. The cooperation of the owner. Are there any priors at this location? There's a whole laundry list of things that you need to consider before you make a decision of issuing a citation. And another thing, one of the most important things to consider is resources, right? Do you have the availability to provide any resources to mitigate this ordinance infraction? Because at the end of the day, that's all that we can do is enforce our ordinances, right? And we talked about meeting people where they are, all this, but at the end of the day, officers do need to provide some form of justification, right, to not remove an animal. And a lot of times that justification is in the form of resources, dog food, dog houses, dog house repair. You don't even need to provide a brand new dog house, right? A lot of times you can just work and get creative with your resources. And whether you got an extra piece of wood and a couple zip ties, you know, you can really work with the owner and use that time of working with the owner to fix that problem as a relationship building opportunity. And now you have a friend in the community, right? And that brown dog that I was talking about earlier, we could have had an advocate for our shelter with that owner. He could have told his neighbors about us, and then we go and talk to the neighbors. And so that's how you change the way that you're perceived in the community, from being a dog catcher to being from being a dog catcher to being a welcomed sight, if you will.
Well, you know, I always say that animal control and humane law and all of us, we're heroes in the community and we're problem solvers. You know, Nick, and my next question for you, and it has been touched on a little bit, but I want to ask you, like, what do you think the benefits are? Now, I know the benefits to the department, and, you know, Audra's touched on them, and, you know, April talked about the numbers of animals coming into the shelter and all that. But when you and I originally started having conversations about this, the first thing you said that was a benefit to you as an officer to taking this, you know, this approach, so to speak, didn't have anything to do with the reduction of shelter intake. So share with us your take on how it benefited you as an officer to be less enforcement heavy and more resource geared towards solving problems with resources.
Yeah. So once again, the benefits of this are just, it's a laundry list, right? I mean, and it's all encompassing. Everything from increasing foster and volunteer engagement. And look, the list goes on. But the number one thing, and that I always focus on, because I've lived it, I didn't read this from a book, it's officer safety. You are so much safer working in a community where you're trusted and where you're looked at as a positive site. And it's kind of basic math, right? You increase positive relationships, you increase you know, your association with key members of your communities, and you decrease the friction between the community itself and your municipality or your shelter or the officers or whatever the case may be. And just by nature, by simple math, you're going to be able to work much safer. An example of this is one of the first experiences I had in the field was we were riding through an underserved area of Atlanta, and all of a sudden we hear boom, boom. And it was Coke bottles. People had thrown 2 full Coke bottles at my truck, at our truck. And I thought we were being shot at or something. I was scared. But literally a month later, we are on that street and we are shaking hands with people. And we're saying, hey, how you doing, man? Like, nice to meet you. Come on up to the shelter. We got dogs. We got cats. We're giving out dog food to anybody, you know, and it was it turned into a point where I actually coined the nickname, and I didn't give it to myself. This was given to me, but the dog food man, right? And so, like, instead of the ice cream man riding through, I was able to source enough resources, enough dog food, where I was using dog food as almost a form of relationship building tool. And so that same neighborhood that I was getting Coke bottles thrown at my truck, now I'm safely working and I'm safely being able to handle real, actual cruelties if they did exist on that street safely without being harassed or without, you know, we all deal with it across the country. So.
And I also know the story that you probably weren't going to share, that one day while you were waiting for the owner of a dog, you know, a couple of dogs in a yard to come home, that you were actually invited to sit down on the corner and play poker with a bunch of the guys that were just hanging out on the corner, and that you took them up on that offer.
I did, but I think for legal reasons, I have to say that I didn't put any real money on the game. But yeah, yep. No, I mean, like you don't have to operate within the enforcement bubble mindset. Like, you can sit down with some folks or shoot some basketball with the local kids, you know, like, get out of your truck and engage.
Yeah. And, you know, you see videos now, you know, on YouTube all over the place of police officers playing basketball with kids, like you said. And man, I'm just waiting for that day when I see an ACO out there, you know, running around a dog park and acting silly with a dog and, you know, and the family and all that. Any ACOs listening, man, I think that would go viral, and I'd help that go viral. Nick, the other thing I want to ask you is, you know, and I just want you to share with people, one of the things you and I, we go all over the country and we talk to people all over the country. And there's a consistent message that you give to every single agency that you talk to, and it's to me, it's a piece of advice that it's the most important piece of advice all over the place. And if you could quickly just share that with everyone today, that would be great.
I'd love to, and I appreciate it, Scott. So the term community engagement in of itself is used so incredibly loosely throughout this industry. The term community engagement can mean one thing to one person, another thing to another person. Community engagement to me is not something that you can do for 20 minutes at the end of your shift if you have the time. It's not something that you can do here and there throughout your day. Community engagement to me is a philosophy. It's a mindset. It's something that you take with you on every single call that you work, on to every single individual that you speak to, no matter the case. It doesn't matter. From the left side to the right side of that spectrum, community engagement is the I guess the sails that guides your boat, if you will. And I do like to make that clear, because a lot of times people hear community engagement, community outreach, and it gets very technical and this and that and this and that. I believe that it's something that no matter if you're working a skinny dog call or a simple dog at large call or something even more complicated, right? Working with this philosophy and this mindset is going to not only make you safer, it's going to increase your live release rates. It's going to increase, you just go down the list of benefits, including advocacy for your shelter, which then increases your fundraising efforts. And we all know that, you know, with more money, more mission, as a good friend of ours likes to say.
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, thank you, Nick. Now I'm gonna ask a question. I'm gonna pose it to everyone, and Audra, we'll start with you. What was some of the creative ways that you were able to provide resources that kept pets in their homes? And were those coming from your agency or a partner agency?
I'm thinking of a dog named Milo that we had, and he was a bite dog, and he was a giant brindle mastiff. And we had this dog with us for like 8 months, and the owner was in a relatively low income area. He did not work. He maybe had some other problems as well. And we tried to get this, he couldn't at the time afford to get the dog back. And we had, you know, tried to work with him. He just didn't have the money to try to get the dog back. Now, this was about 1.5 years ago. And we eventually ended up keeping that dog for around 8 months. And finally, one of the staff here just called him and said, "Do you want this dog back if we just bring him back?" And he was like, "Yeah, you would do that for me?" And we're like, "Yeah." So we went there as a group at our shelter, and we were looking to see how this dog kept getting out, because it was like his second or third bite. And he kept getting out because he was tying him to this little tiny stick in the front yard. And of course, as soon as he saw another dog or something, he broke it and hopped over the fence. And the fence was only like 2 feet high. So he had this outdoor carport. And we ended up, and I'm not going to say me, because I am not like a big handyman type person, but I went just to watch and carry some wood. But we went there and we converted his outdoor carport area, which he was not using except to store a bunch of junk. We cleaned it all out for him, and we built an enclosure for Milo so that he had a way in and out of the house. He had a pool. He had, you know, everything that he needed. We set this gentleman up with dog food and toys and chews and everything. And actually, we had gotten a grant from Best Friends that allowed us to buy those kinds of things for him, along with the wood and everything. And we were able to give him back, and we still check on him. And he cried when we brought, and Milo remembered him from 8 months earlier, and he cried and he tried to give us $100. And I said, no, you keep that money and you just take care of Milo for us. And he is like Nick and April were saying, the greatest advocate for us. He's like, anytime you guys want to come over, you don't even have to call, just show up, you know. And that was a team effort. And that made us feel so good, because we were able to reunite Milo with this gentleman. And honestly, Milo was not a dog we were going to be able to get out, because I think I was telling you the story last week that he bit a volunteer because he was in my office and she just walked by and he bit her. I mean, this dog was not somebody that was going to be like easily adopted out, you know? So, I mean, and that was just a really good feeling to be able to do that for him. And it really costs barely anything to get that dog back to him. So that's my story.
That's great. I love it. April?
So Scott, I'm going to answer your question a little broadly.
Okay.
When I think about, you know, the resources that we give to our community and sort of creative ways for acquiring those resources, what I really think about is the greatest resource we gave our community was our time. And it's really the greatest thing we gave our officers, right? Because without building time into their day, they didn't have time to have those conversations, to get to those root causes of, the situations like Audra's talking about with Milo. If officers didn't have time to have those conversations, didn't have time to go out to the property and see how Milo was getting off the property, well, would Milo be in that situation, right? So for us, when I think about sort of the creative ways that we built that critical resource of time into our staff's schedule, what that looked like was reevaluating what they're spending their time doing, right? So reevaluating what kind of calls they're responding to and figuring out what we should be doing, both under policy or under ordinance, figuring out what we should not be doing and stopping that, and figuring out what we can reallocate to, maybe another division or another role within the organization. So, we didn't need an officer to go out for every bite investigation. We could have our dispatcher or an administrative assistant call and get the initial details, and then we'd send the officer out for they could focus their time and their energy with that pet owner, the dog owner, so that they could do exactly what Audra's talking about, help them solve for the long term so that we don't continue to have the same issue.
Right. And the issue of time is always a concern. I mean, any officer knows that you get in the morning and you look at your call log. Oh my gosh, how am I going to get to all these calls today? So that's a great answer, April. Thank you. Nick, over to you. Same question.
Yeah. So creative ways. All right. So look, I think of resources, not necessarily as resources, but a byproduct of relationships. And so the question should be posed of what are creative ways to build relationships? And like, for instance, your local pet supply store, go in and build a relationship with that manager, right? You don't have to wait for somebody at your shelter to do it. You as an officer can do this. You don't need to wait for anybody else to make that first move. Get out there and build relationships, and you're going to start to see resources start to manifest themselves in all different kinds of ways, right? There's no one way to do it. Who knows, if this person might have an extra doghouse they'd be able to donate. My granny always used to say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Coming from Georgia, I do say granny, and I'm not going to apologize for y'all either. But it's true, and if you have a need for resources, then you need to let people know that. But you need to be able to let people know that in a gentle and delicate way without coming across as too strong or anything like that. And so I think that when it comes down to it, resources are a byproduct of relationships. And so how can you build more relationships with people and individuals and businesses, local businesses? Don't hesitate. If you got a few minutes, go into a Dollar General and ask for the manager. Or a dollar store, it doesn't matter, any pet supply store. The people that you speak to on a day-to-day basis, right? What if every officer on your team had this mindset? Well, now you have an action team. You have an actual on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground action team that can help funnel resources into your shelter. And then not only resources, but now you have lower animal cruelty rates, right? You have lower call volumes, and that frees up more time for more engagement. It's almost a domino effect once it's really taken a hold of by the entire staff.
Yeah, and that's so true about the relationships. I remember when I was an officer, I had a kid who loved his dog. He was a good kid in a very underserved section of Boston, and he had a piece of plywood propped up against the fence for a shelter. And the kid just loved his dog. The family loved the dog. They did not want the dog. The mom didn't want the dog in the house, but this kid was just a really good kid. And I reached out, I went across the street or down the street a little ways to a construction site just to get some scrap lumber to try and help the kid a little bit. When the construction team found out what I was doing, man, they grabbed all their tools and wood and went over there and built that kid, that dog, this fantastic dog house. I got their card. I mean, it works when you reach out, like, going to Walmart or pet supply stores. It works. You can get resources that way, and it does. It comes down to having, as it was said, the time and the relationships and everything that we're doing. Well, thanks everybody. We do have some questions in the chat that I'm going to throw out. So I'm going to start with This one, and I'm gonna, everyone can have the chance to answer it, but Audra, I'm gonna direct this first one at you. And have you guys ever looked at, like, looking at social work guidelines, identifying and treating child neglect as a standard comparison for what happens in animal welfare? Have you ever looked at those guidelines for comparison?
We do. We usually are either the first people going in and we're like, whoa, something's going on here. And then we'll get in touch with Child Protection Services, or the elderly, the one that handles elderly people, or we're on the other end where it came from code enforcement, or it came from the school because a little girl came to school and she smells like cat urine really, really bad, you know? And so can you please go check her surroundings and see what's going on over there and everything. But we do go within the guidelines on either side of the spectrum. It's either we're the first ones in there noticing something, or we're the ones that are called in after somebody else has.
Okay. Does anyone else want to respond to that one? You got a few, so. All right. The next question we have here is, should people who surrender their animal because they can't care for them ever receive citations or other punitive measures due to the condition of the animal? I'm going to throw that one over to you, April.
I mean, I was really thinking about just a real short response of no.
Yeah.
Just no. You know, it's, again, it goes back to this idea that, you know, we have people in our communities across this nation that struggle, and they struggle for a whole host of issues, right? And it affects their ability to care for their animal in the way that maybe we prefer. And so if somebody is lacking resources and they're coming to you and they're saying, I just can't, because I don't have the resources. I recognize I don't have the resources, and I'm doing what I think is best. You don't punish them for that. At least not it's not my philosophy. You thank them. You still try to build a relationship with them. You want to try to take that opportunity to connect them with information, resources they may need down the road. Because you may be able to, one, reconnect them with their pet, or two, at the very least, get them connected to resources that will either help them as an individual or a family, improve their situation, and you may be able to help that next pet that family gets.
Because we know they're probably going to get another pet eventually.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. I hate the old saying that if you can't afford a pet, you shouldn't have a pet.
Right.
And our job is to go out there and take them away from people. So, does anyone else want to touch on that topic of punishing people when they surrender animals over? Okay. So here's a question I'm going to throw over at you, Nick. And this is a question I hear a lot. And apparently there was a conversation during a Zoom presentation right before this one from the association where the concept of uniforms came up. And what are your opinions of what animal control and humane law enforcement officers should be wearing while they're out in the field?
That's a tough question, right? Because at the end of the day, what matters is your relationships and your conversations and the way that you handle yourself. Now, it may be much easier to develop these relationships and say, hey, I'm Nick, versus if I'm not wearing, you know, the entire belt with, you know, but at the same time, it's not impossible. And it's definitely look, the way I look at this is officer safety, right? A lot of times the vest is there for officer safety. Everything on your belt is there for officer safety. If you really, really drill down on your relationship building and your engagement within your community, that will be your officer safety. Now, I understand there are some situations that come up and look, it's officer preference too, you know, and whatever policies you may have within your organization. I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer here. I think that it's whatever you are comfortable with. And if you feel more comfortable being able to have these conversations protected with a vest or with a firearm on your side or whatever your agency's policies may be, I say go for it. But me personally, I didn't like to have all that stuff. that was just what I felt comfortable with. I felt like I was able to have real open and honest conversations if I didn't have a camera on, you know, and there's a lot of different intricacies that come into it. But at the end of the day, it's what are you comfortable with? Go out there and help some animals.
I'd also like to pose that question to all of you. April, what are your thoughts for your new department in Kansas City?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Nick on this. It's for me, I look at uniforms in two ways. One, we want to make sure that we're equipping folks so that they can stay safe, and so that they can safely handle, animals. We don't want, for example, if we want to try to capture an animal and we need a leash, we don't want to have to run back to the truck for it. We want to be able to tuck it in our pocket, or we want to be able to tuck it on our belt, or what have you. But I think consideration certainly should be made for what other agencies look like in your community, and then how they're perceived, right? So if you have, I worked with a community that had their officers dressed like, or very similarly to, their corrections officers. And so when their officers would go out to addresses, they would be perceived as a corrections officer. And that immediately changed the tone of that conversation before they even had a chance to say hi. And so I think that's something to consider when you're thinking about outfitting your staff. I think there's a balance certainly to be had. I came from an agency that had the vest, and we had the tactical pants, and we had the belts and the mic, body mic, and, we had all the gear, but we also didn't look like anybody else running around in our jurisdiction. And so when people saw us, they knew exactly who we were, and we had already spent years working to repair our relationship with our community. And so when they saw us, they weren't looking at our tools and our gear and our big vest. They were looking at us as the resource that we had come to be for them.
Awesome. Audra, would you like to answer that question as well?
Just really quickly, we did change our uniforms a little while ago, this past year, or maybe it was even this year, but we did go with the polo shirt and, the tactical pants, and they have like a duty belt, but it's just got a couple things on it for, maybe a bite stick for protection. But we did look exactly like the sheriff's department, and I personally hated it, because it's like, that's not a good thing. They don't know who you are, they don't like cops, so we did change it, and we went with like black shirts, which one of my field supervisors is not happy about because it's hot here in Arizona, but they look sharp and they don't look like the deputies anymore. So I feel a lot better about it. And if they want to wear a bulletproof vest because they feel better and it makes them feel safer, then they wear it. But most of them really don't. And if there's a situation where we know that somebody's going to be in a neighborhood that's unsafe, we don't go alone. We always make sure somebody goes with, just everybody's very safe that way.
And I think officer safety is really important. And you also hit on for instance, to start with, my opinion is it is up to the individual officer what they feel more comfortable on. That's where I go. But the big thing for me, and you hit on this, Audra, was that they look sharp. And I wouldn't say, I want my officer just looking sharp, but I want them looking professional, and I want them looking respectful. I do hold the position of animal control up as local heroes, and I do put us in that light, where people would put, firefighters and everyone loves a firefighter, right? They're heroes and all that. We should be seen that way too. And I think that all too often we go out in, tattered jeans and an old T-shirt that, has peeling, has one of those badges on there that's peeling off, and it's dirty, and it's ill kept. And I think that does speak volumes for, I shouldn't say that. It gives the wrong impression of who you are and who you want to be when you do that. So that's always been my take on it. So, and I think we're running out of time. We have just a couple of minutes left. So I do want to give, we have 3 minutes left, and I just want to give you guys the opportunity. Is there anything you guys want to throw out there in the last 3 minutes that we have?
Yeah, I most definitely do. Keep in mind there's officer discretion here. And so by no means when we're having these conversations, if that animal, if that crosses the line into cruelty, or let's say somebody did come in to surrender an animal, and you can clearly tell that this was coming from a cruel situation, do your job, issue citations, do whatever you as an agency does. And don't think that whenever we're having these conversations, we're saying be weak on cruelty. If anything, it's quite the opposite. We just want to be proactive on preventing the cruelty versus responding after the fact. But, you know, by no means necessary do I feel that you should let somebody get away with animal cruelty. I just think that we need to really define where that line is in the sand. And is this animal truly suffering? Because that's what it all comes down to.
April, Audra, anything you want to add?
Just to kind of piggyback on what Nick was sharing, you know, one of the reasons it's so important to commit to having conversations and building relationships and delivering resources when you can is because that works to interrupt that process. If you can work with a family to stop something from going bad, then you have won for that family, you've won for that pet, and you've won for your community. You, again, have increased the capacity to care. And so, as Nick said, it's not about negating our responsibilities around ending animal cruelty in our communities, but committing to delivering those resources is such a critical component to helping our pets live healthier, happier lives in our community.
Yeah.
Very well said.
The only thing I wanted to say is we're already in a highly emotionally charged line of work, and we see a lot of bad things, and we do see a lot of good things. You know, don't be reactive. Like Nick was saying, be proactive. Don't be reactive, and don't lead with your emotion. You know, don't judge people based on how you would handle the situation, because you don't know their situation. And it's hard to do, but got to do it.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you everyone who attended. Again, we are going to have this, the link to this put up sometime tomorrow on our website. And I hope you all took something away from this that you can either utilize in your daily lives or share out with someone else. And everyone be safe out there, especially you officers out there knocking on doors every day. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.